My parents forced me to be the responsible one while my siblings got to enjoy their lives. Now that they need someone to take care of them, they expect me to drop everything, but I'm done sacrificing myself for them. Reason was. Have you ever felt like you were the one left holding the weight of the world on your shoulders, while others around you seem to live carefree, enjoying life without a second thought? Well, that's exactly how I've felt my entire life. Ever since I was old enough to understand what responsibility meant, my parents made it clear I was the one they could count on. While my siblings were allowed to live their lives without a care, I was the one expected to be the adult in the room. They partied, traveled, and pursued their dreams, while I was stuck at home, making sure everything ran smoothly. I didn't get the luxury of feeling carefree, and honestly, I resented it. But that resentment was something I buried deep inside because, well, family, right? Years passed, and I continued to take on the heavy load, sacrificing my own dreams and desires for the sake of everyone else. Now, here we are. My parents are getting older, and, as expected, they've started to need help. And guess who they're turning to? Me. The same person they've relied on all these years, the one who has always put their needs before my own. The thing is, I've had enough. I'm tired of being the one who drops everything to cater to their every need while my siblings sit back and enjoy their lives. But now, it's different. I'm done sacrificing myself for them. I've spent so many years putting myself last, and now, when I need to focus on my own life, they expect me to keep dropping everything for them. It feels like I'm stuck in a never-ending cycle, and I can't help but wonder, why am I the only one who has to bear the burden of their choices? And when I finally stand up for myself, will they understand, or will they just keep taking, expecting me to give everything? But here's the real question, will I be able to walk away, or will family duty pull me back in once again? Stick around to hear what happens next. Growing up, it always felt like I was the responsible one by default. My parents never explicitly said, you have to be the mature one, but their actions made it clear. I was the one who stayed home to take care of the house, while my siblings had their fun. I remember feeling the sting when my friends would talk about their family vacations, their siblings hanging out together, and their carefree summers, while I stayed behind to manage the household chores, take care of our pets, and even help with my parents' work. I was the one who missed out on things because I had to be reliable, the one who never got the chance to let go and be just a kid. Meanwhile, my siblings, my older brother and younger sister, had it easy. My brother was always out with his friends, partying and living life. He never had to worry about responsibilities at home. My sister, being younger, was always doted on and shielded from the pressures that I had to face. They were allowed to make mistakes, to be wild and carefree, while I was expected to set the example and be perfect. I remember hearing things like, you should be the role model for your siblings, and we're counting on you to make things right. There was never any room for error, and certainly no room for my own needs or desires. But the years have gone by, and I began to feel like I was drowning. My dreams, my ambitions, all the things I had hoped to pursue, took a backseat to what everyone else needed. I pushed my own happiness aside, convinced that one day, I'd be appreciated for all the sacrifices I made. But as time passed, that gratitude never came. Instead, I just kept giving more of myself, while everyone else went on with their lives as if nothing had changed. And now, with my parents aging and needing more care, they're coming to me once again. They expect me to drop everything and be there, as if I've never had a life of my own. I've tried to communicate how I feel, how I can't keep doing this, but it always feels like my words fall on deaf ears. My brother, still living his carefree life, doesn't even seem to notice the weight that's been placed on me. My sister, who's now married and has her own family, hasn't even called to ask how I'm holding up. It's like I'm invisible to them, the one who's always there when things go wrong, but never the one they turn to when they need to step up. So, now I'm left with this painful choice. Do I continue being the responsible one for everyone, or do I finally put myself first and walk away? What will happen when I stop being the person they can rely on? The tension is thick, and I'm still unsure how to navigate this. The more I think about it, the more frustrated I become. Every time I see my siblings, it's like a constant reminder of everything I've sacrificed. My brother, who's never had to worry about anything, is now living his best life in another city, doing whatever he pleases. The occasional text or phone call from him feels like an afterthought, just enough to keep the peace, but never really addressing the fact that he's completely oblivious to how hard things have been for me. And my sister? She's too busy with her own family to even pick up the phone. If I try to express how much I'm struggling, they always have an excuse. I didn't know you were so overwhelmed, they'll say, or, well, you never said anything. But the truth is, I've said plenty. They just never listen. Every time my parents call me now, I can't help but feel like it's a manipulation. They've always known that I would be there for them, no questions asked, but now it feels different. It feels like they expect me to just drop everything without so much as a thank you. I've spent so many years trying to make them proud, trying to be the perfect daughter, but at what cost? It's as if they've gotten used to me being their backup, always there when things get tough, never questioning it. And then there's the guilt that creeps in. Every time I think about stepping away, about saying no, a part of me feels like I'm betraying my family. They're my parents, after all. They raised me, and they're not getting any younger. But why should I be the one to shoulder the entire burden? I feel like I'm drowning, and no one sees it. There's no one to turn to, no one who understands the weight I've been carrying for so long. It doesn't help that when I bring it up, I'm met with excuses. Your father's health is declining, my mom will say, as if I don't know that already. Your dad just can't do this alone anymore. It's always about what they need, what's expected of me, and nothing about what I need. I don't even know who I am anymore, beyond the person who takes care of everyone else. When was the last time I did something just for me? When was the last time I stopped and asked myself what I wanted? The pressure is suffocating, and as the days go by, I can feel my patience wearing thin. I've tried to talk to my siblings about it, tried to make them see how much I've given up, but it's always met with indifference. My brother brushes it off, too busy with his own life to care, and my sister simply doesn't get it. They think I'm exaggerating, that I'm just complaining. But how can they understand? They've never had to be the responsible one. They've never had to make sacrifices, to carry the burden of the family's expectations on their shoulders. I can feel myself reaching a breaking point. There's only so much I can give before I break, and I'm getting dangerously close to that edge. What happens when I say no? When I stop playing the role I've been cast in for so many years? Will they finally see me, or will they just keep taking, expecting me to always be there when they need me? I can feel the tension building, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep holding it together. The calls started to come more frequently. My parents, especially my mom, would call me with this urgency in her voice, as though I was the only one who could fix things. "We need you," she'd say, always in that pleading tone that made it impossible to ignore. Each time, I'd drop whatever I was doing, always with the feeling that if I didn't answer the call, if I didn't come through, I'd be the bad guy. But that's what made it worse, right? The guilt. It was like they knew how to manipulate me, to play on my sense of duty, the one thing I could never shake. I've been doing this for years now, putting my life aside for them. But there was a certain sharpness in my mother's voice that was different this time, a sense of desperation that I couldn't ignore. My father's health had taken another turn for the worse, and this time, it seemed like they were truly counting on me. I was at work when I got the call this time. My phone rang, and I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. The familiar number. The familiar sense of dread. I debated whether to answer, the frustration building inside me. Part of me wanted to just let it go, to see what would happen if I didn't immediately jump into action. But then the guilt crept in. What if something happened? What if my father needed me, and I wasn't there? I answered the call. It was worse than I imagined. My mom was crying, telling me that my father's condition had worsened, that they couldn't handle it alone anymore. She said she didn't know what to do, that she was scared. I could hear the tremble in her voice, and for a moment, my heart broke for her. But then, just as quickly, the anger bubbled up inside me again. Why did this always fall on me? Why wasn't my brother here? Why wasn't my sister stepping in to help? I told her I needed time. I couldn't just drop everything this time. I had my own life, my own responsibilities. But she didn't listen. She kept insisting that they needed me, that I was the only one who could do this. "You're the responsible one, honey," she said, her voice breaking. "You've always been the one to take care of things." And it hit me harder than ever before. The words echoed in my mind as I ended the call. The responsible one. Always the responsible one. But what about me? When do I get to just be me? I was so close to calling my brother, telling him to get his act together and come back, to help me for once. But I knew what that would bring, an empty promise, an excuse, or worse, silence. He'd probably find a way to avoid it, just like he always did. I was left in that moment, standing in the middle of my own life, feeling like I was being pulled in two directions. On one hand, I felt a responsibility to my family, my parents, who needed me now more than ever. But on the other hand, the weight of the years of sacrifice, of never being able to live my life for myself, felt like it was suffocating me. What if I said no? What if I walked away from it all, for good? Could I live with that decision? But I couldn't just walk away, could I? Not now. Not when things were this bad. The tension was unbearable. The weight of the decision, the guilt, the anger, the resentment, everything was piling up inside me, pushing me closer to the edge. I was standing on the brink of something, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. But what was I supposed to do? Just as I was wrestling with my thoughts, trying to figure out what to do next, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was from my brother. My first instinct was to ignore it. Why bother? He'd never been there when I needed him, and I wasn't in the mood for another one of his "I'll try to help later" conversations. But something in me made me answer. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the small flicker of hope that he might actually step up this time. "Hey," his voice came through, casual as ever, as if nothing was wrong. "I just heard about Dad. How's everything going?" His tone was light, almost indifferent. I paused, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the phone. My emotions were all over the place, anger, frustration, and an aching sense of betrayal. "How's everything going?" I repeated, my voice tight. "You're asking me that now? Where have you been all this time? Why aren't you here helping?" There was a long silence on the other end, then the faint sound of him sighing. I know, I should have been more involved. But listen. I've got something important to tell you." His tone shifted then, serious and uncharacteristically urgent. "I'm coming home. I'm flying in tonight. I'm going to help." I couldn't believe it. After all these years, after everything that had happened, he was finally coming home? Part of me wanted to just hang up, to refuse to let him play the hero now. But another part of me, maybe the part that still longed for the family bond we'd once shared, felt a flicker of relief. Maybe things were finally about to change. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for. But just as quickly, that hope began to waver. There was something off in his voice, something that didn't quite sit right with me. It was as if he was saying the words he thought I wanted to hear, but there was no real sincerity behind them. "I'm coming, I promise," he repeated, as if trying to convince both of us. "I don't need a promise," I snapped. "I need you to show up. I need you to be here now. Not later. Not when it's convenient for you." Another long silence followed. Finally, he spoke, this time with a tone that sounded almost too rehearsed. "Look, I can't explain everything right now, but just trust me, okay? I'll take care of things when I get there." His words felt hollow, and something about the way he was speaking set my nerves on edge. I felt a cold chill run through me, like a gut instinct telling me that this wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. Why had he waited until now? Why hadn't he reached out earlier, when my parents first needed help? Was he really coming back for them, or was there something else at play here? The questions swirled in my head, and a knot tightened in my stomach. I wanted to believe that things could finally change, that I wasn't alone in carrying the weight of our family's needs. But what if this was just another one of his empty promises? What if, this time, I wasn't going to get the help I desperately needed? I hung up the phone, my mind racing with doubt. Something didn't add up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to be pulled into something much bigger, something I wasn't prepared for. The stakes had just gotten higher, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending that everything was going to be okay. The tension was thick, and I could feel it building, the quiet before the storm. Something was coming, but I still had no idea what it was. The night my brother was supposed to come home, I couldn't stop pacing. I couldn't quiet the voice in my head that kept warning me, telling me to expect the worst. But when I heard the knock on the door, my heart skipped a beat. It was him. He was finally here. I opened the door, but the moment I saw him, my stomach sank. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood someone I hadn't seen in years, my sister. The same sister who had been living her life, distant and completely uninvolved. The same sister who had never once offered to help, who had made excuses every time my parents needed her. "Surprise," my brother said with a smirk, stepping aside to let her in. I froze. "What are you both doing here?" My sister glanced around the room, her expression a mix of guilt and indifference. "I heard what's been going on," she said, shrugging slightly as if it were no big deal. "And I guess I owe it to you to show up. But don't think I'm going to make a habit of this." I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. For all the times I'd begged for help, for all the years I'd taken on everything myself, now, when I was at my breaking point, they were finally here. But there was no apology, no acknowledgement of how much I had sacrificed. Instead, it felt like they were doing this because they had to, not because they wanted to. "I can't believe this," I muttered under my breath, but they both heard me. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," my brother said, but his words didn't feel real. He still seemed detached, as if he was playing a part in a family drama, but not really living it. My sister added, "It's not like we've been completely unaware of what's been going on. You've been carrying this family, and now, it's time for the rest of us to help." Maybe. I felt a surge of anger rise in me. Maybe? You both decided to help, maybe? After all this time, after everything I've done, you both finally show up and act like it's no big deal? The words spilled out, and I didn't care that they were hearing the raw truth of how I felt. For years, I'd been holding this all in, biting my tongue, convincing myself that things would eventually change. But now that they were standing there, offering empty promises and half-hearted attempts at making amends, I felt nothing but resentment. But then, my mom called from the living room. Her voice was weak, shaking, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability that had been hidden beneath her cold, demanding requests. "Honey, we need you. Please, come help." I turned back to look at my siblings, and in that moment, I saw it. They weren't here to save the day, not really. They were here because the situation was too big for them to ignore any longer. But it wasn't because they suddenly cared about all the years I'd spent holding everything together. It was because they realized they couldn't do it without me. My brother's hand rested on my shoulder. "We're here now. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe things were finally changing. But I knew deep down that I couldn't let myself fall for the same empty promises. They'd let me down too many times before. As I turned to walk toward my parents' room, the weight of everything pressing down on me, something hit me, a final twist that made everything feel even more complicated. I received a message on my phone. It was from my father's doctor. "Your father's condition has stabilized. We've got it under control. Don't worry." I stood there, in the doorway, my siblings standing behind me, looking confused as I processed the words. They weren't needed here. Not now. Not anymore. The truth was, I had been carrying everything for so long because I thought I had to. I thought I was the only one who could. But now I knew. I wasn't just the responsible one anymore. I was someone who had to choose when to say enough was enough. I turned around and faced my siblings, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "It's too late for you to change things," I said quietly, the finality in my voice surprising even myself. "I've spent years sacrificing myself for this family. And I'm done." And just like that, everything shifted. The tension, the resentment, the broken promises, they all hung in the air, unresolved, lingering. I wasn't sure where I was going from here, but I knew I couldn't keep living for everyone else anymore. The truth had set in, but I wasn't sure if it was too late for me to finally live for myself. As I stood there, facing my siblings, a wave of clarity washed over me. I had spent so many years believing that I had to bear the weight of everything, that I was the one who had to make the sacrifices, to be the responsible one. But now, I understood that it wasn't my burden alone to carry. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. And it was time to choose myself. My siblings looked at each other, clearly unsure of what to say. I could see it now, their discomfort, their guilt, but it was too late for apologies or explanations. The damage had been done over the years. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just done. Done with living my life for them. Done with sacrificing my happiness to meet everyone else's expectations. "You should have been here sooner," I said softly, turning away and walking toward the living room. My voice wasn't harsh, but there was no mistaking the finality in it. "But you weren't. And I can't keep putting myself last anymore." My brother followed me, his voice strained. "I know, and I'm sorry." "We didn't realize." "No, you didn't," I interrupted, glancing back at him. "You didn't realize, and that's the problem. But I've realized that I don't need to wait for you to finally show up." I left them standing there, a quiet heaviness settling between us. The doctor had confirmed what I'd already known deep down, my parents were stable now. They didn't need me to sacrifice myself anymore. And while it was difficult to let go of that role I had played for so long, I knew it was the right choice. The days that followed were quiet. My siblings, despite their attempts to apologize, couldn't make up for the years they'd missed. But as time went on, I began to realize that I didn't need them to. I didn't need anyone to validate my choices anymore. I focused on rebuilding my own life, taking the time to rediscover who I was outside of being the responsible one. I started doing things for myself, things I had put off for years. I traveled. I spent more time with friends. I even took up a new hobby. Most importantly, I found peace in knowing that I had made the right choice for me. I was no longer a martyr, waiting to be needed. I was finally free to live my own life. And while things with my family might never be the same, I was no longer afraid to say no when I needed to. It was a new beginning, for me, and for them, too. The lessons were clear. You can't keep sacrificing yourself for others if it means losing who you are. You can't always wait for people to come around. Sometimes, you need to walk away and choose your own happiness.